We have two panelists who are going to be speaking. Ali Ezzatyar does not need any introduction. He's one of our organizers. Ali is a lawyer. I actually knew that we were going to have at least one lawyer at the conference because I knew Ali was in charge, or partly in charge, although we try to keep it to one maximum most of these conferences. He's a lawyer who's based in London and Paris. He is a writer. He's kind of an intellectual and professional bon vivant and polymath who does many different things. He's a commentator in international relations, diplomacy, international law. He publishes in English and French. He's frequently seen on BBC World Radio. His handsome countenance and eloquent voice is frequently heard in media. There's demand for it all around the world. He's now counsel to a large internet company in San Francisco, and I'm delighted to have him speaking on this panel as well. He'll be speaking first, and then Alan Collinsworth, who is a fellow at EWI's Worldwide Security Initiative, will be speaking second. He's the president and founder of the Fara Group, which is a frontier project management organization employing Turkey's manufacturing base and human resources to projects in the Middle East and Central Asia. He also hosts Corridor 39, a television program on geopolitical trends shaping the Middle East's, MENA's economic development. So delighted to have both Alan and Ali with us for this panel, and I'll turn it over to them. Ali will speak first.
So I don't have much to teach anyone here, unfortunately. I'm just going to kind of try to wing this here and give you guys some observations from my own personal experience with the subject matter at hand. So as Steve mentioned, unfortunately, I'm a lawyer by training, and I specialize in capital markets and M&A transactions. In the first part of my career, I was based in Europe, and I worked mostly with emerging market companies doing securities, capital markets sort of transactions. I know that sounds boring. I have a point to it. What that basically means is I'd negotiate deals when there was Americans on one side and these American investors on one side and these emerging market companies on the other side. And, I worked in the Gulf a fair bit, in places like India, with these mid-level, mid-large, even sort of mid to large cap companies that were taking this growth step and trying to sell securities to American investors, which was huge. It was a hallmark for their companies at the time. And Turkey was one of the most sort of interesting places where I had an opportunity to work as an attorney. And just to give you a bit of a background on myself, I'm Kurdish, Iranian, American. Try saying that 3 times fast. That's particularly kind of an interesting perspective to have in a place like Istanbul, as an outside observer, as someone who followed, who's the Kurdish rights movement, something was very essential to me as a child growing up in America in the 80s when the Unfall campaign was happening and when Turkey was going through some of its rougher times with respect to its Kurdish problem. And so it was a totally different perspective for me. And, just to give you a couple of anecdotes on the way things were with some of these transactions. So we would prepare these disclosure prospectuses where we would prepare all of the things that these American institutional investors would need, and we'd negotiate it with the Turkish bankers for investment in securities. And we'd have to write opinions saying that everything in here is the most material, sort of up-to-date information on this company. So it was very important to us to get that information right. And it was also very important for the Turkish side to sort of present the most kind of compelling business argument that they could. And there was a section in most of these prospectuses called risk factors. And we would cover sort of international economic, domestic economic, and political risks in this perspective. And we'd negotiate this with the bankers and the lawyers on both sides. I don't know if you're familiar with that process, Alan, but it's a really interesting one. I can only imagine that you probably understand exactly what I'm going to discuss. So, as part of these prospectuses, I could see the way that these Turkish businessmen and these Turkish attorneys saw risk in their country. And it was very telling. It was like pulling teeth, including anything about, problems with neighbors or military involvement in government, or especially the Kurdish question. And I remember one particular instance was very interesting for me because, most of my Turkish colleagues in Istanbul would immediately ask if I was Turkish because of my name and because of the way I look. And so I would say, no, this is my background. It was never an issue. But then it also made it a bit tricky for me to present these risk factors, especially when I wanted to insist, look, I think these investors need to know that tomorrow the price of the security may drop because there's some conflict in Southeast Turkey, for example. And so, I just had this distinct memory of a British colleague of mine, who kind of took the bait, saying, look, we need to include something on this. It's an important issue. There's basically the potential for flaring up of tensions against in the southeast. As of last week, there was an attack. And, these Turkish businessmen at the time were kind of insisting, this banker, who also was, this disclosure was very important to him. He was insisting that, it's a minor problem. It's behind the country. It's really not an issue. And, the bewildered British attorney pulls out this article. It's like, but there was 24 people killed yesterday here. The price of the bourse dropped 6% yesterday. We have to include this sort of thing. And, I'm kind of just watching from the sidelines, just thinking, wow, it's really interesting. Pride plays a huge role in the way that business is done in Turkey. And it also translates into another anecdote of mine. And I'll try to sort of segue that. I'm not going to have perfect segues here between story to story as I try to get through this. But the first deal I did in Turkey was an IPO for a mid-sized supermarket. So if any of you have been to Istanbul, you guys probably know about the supermarket Kilal. And they were, IPOing this supermarket that started as a mom and pop shop, had now hundreds of supermarkets, and they were, an IPO was finally going forward. And this is a CEO and a company that was known to be more or less conservative and, was rumored to be aligned, at least from some of the bankers that I talked to, with like the AKP. And it was incredible for me to go, and I ended up going for this deal in the month of Ramadan, which was very interesting and cool for me, to be in Istanbul during that month, to see these Turkish bankers sitting there with their suits and their ties in this multi-million-dollar company that was about to sell securities to the world, not drinking water, and having conversations with us, sidebarring, and really just talking to me about everything has changed now. We feel much more integrated in this economy. We were actually making just as much money a few years ago, but we never felt like we needed to take that next step. We're much more comfortable with where things are right now. We're much more comfortable with where money is right now. And the reason I mention that is because there's plenty that we can read about as far as complaints with the political system and sort of issues that are happening as far as economic inequality in Turkey. But there's another side to consider, which is that a lot of people in Istanbul and outside of Istanbul are feeling increasingly integrated in the Turkish economy. And I'm just sort of making an observation on that based on my conversations with numerous bankers and accountants and professionals, young professionals that didn't feel like they had a stake in the economy until now. And that's also partially because of the success of the economy, but that's something to keep in mind. So I kind of want to switch gears and move into, in my limited time, to talk about these constitutional reforms, and in particular the ones that have been presented recently by Prime Minister Erdogan. And I'd like to discuss them in the context of the Kurdish question. And I think, those who identify as Kurds in Turkey and outside of Turkey will have a totally different perspective on where Turkey is historically today. There were plenty of Kurds out in the street protesting recently this year, but their perspective on where Turkey is much different. They have a much more nuanced, in a way, perspective on where Turkey is now historically, in my view. Turkey has never been a very hospitable place for Kurds, but in the last decade or so, if I don't say so myself, it's seen drastic movements in that direction. And you can just tell by speaking to your average Kurd, both, Turkish Kurds, non-Turkish Kurds, that the psyche has moved in a completely different direction in the way that Kurds view Turkey. And this is, 20 to 25% of the Turkish population, an essential part of that, of that country. A lot of, Turkey's Kurds and the political parties have noted that these reforms haven't done enough. But just, as a bit of an overcap, this is what they may do. They're going to lower the electoral threshold likely to enter parliament so that for the first time it will probably allow Kurdish parties a fighting chance to enter parliament. It will allow teaching Kurdish in private schools officially. And, these are proposed reforms, but these are the proposals, which was, teaching Kurdish in Turkey was unthinkable when I was growing up, at least as a notion. And it will allow a number of reforms that will allow Kurds to practice their culture a bit more freely in Turkey, which is including renaming cities to their Kurdish names and potentially allowing Kurds to give, authentic Kurdish names to their kids. So I wouldn't underestimate the importance that that will have for economic growth in Turkey. Unemployment in the southeast in 2005 was triple or 4 times the rest of the country. And that's an incredible statistic to me. What that means, as much as anything, is there's a huge lack of integration of this hugely important, in terms of size and also in terms of stability, population in the in Turkey. And if these, you can't turn that around in 8 years. The statistics are getting better, but if these constitutional reforms can accelerate that growth and that stability, then they will have done a great deal, not only for Kurdish rights and human rights, but also for Turkey. And in that sense, Turkey is really at a crossroads right now. The conflict can become worse. It can blow out of proportion. It can be like it was before. Or it can take, Turkey really has the opportunity now to solve this problem once and for all. They have the wherewithal, the ability to do so, and the success that would beget the population the whole over to really want to become integrated and choose Turkey over other options. And I think, Erdogan has done something to really want to become integrated and choose Turkey over other options. And I think, Erdogan has done something interesting if you listen to what he says, and he's distinguished kind of the Kurdish problem as an economic one as well. It's a sort of a technocratic view. And he essentially makes the argument, and some of his advisors have made the argument, that unemployment in the Kurdish region, which I mentioned earlier, breeds a culture that makes parties like the PKK, however you view them, and other opposition groups much more attractive. Not only because they're feeling helpless and alienated from society, but because there's simply nothing better to do if you don't have a job. And whether you see these opposition groups as terrorist organizations, resistance movements, or whatever they are, they're undoubtedly these quasi-civil society organizations, and they will have influence. They are a support structure for these populations. The more that Turkey can do to integrate these populations, the more they'll be doing a service to the economy and stability in the country. So, it's rather incredible from my perspective, given the growing pains Turkey is going through now, to sort of see the recent success that Turkey is making on the Kurdish issue. There was always sort of a large impediment seen in Turkey on behalf of Kurds, both for identity, the most basic things. Turkey was seen as sort of a huge impediment, but now it's really not. With the ascendance of the Kurdistan regional government in northern Iraq and Turkey's cooperation with this government and these proposed reforms, Turkey really has presented an opportunity for itself to potentially resolve this problem. And it'll play incredible dividends for peace and stability and also for economic integration, as I mentioned. So, in conclusion, my perspective is that the constitutional reforms proposed are a positive step, that general reforms that we've seen in the last few years are also positive, and that despite the personalities that might be involved in Turkish government or in Kurdish regional government, Turkey truly has a historical opportunity to be a trendsetter, not only for the region, but for any region really where ethnic and religious strife and deep-rooted irredentism has threatened to keep a country united.
Thank you, Ali. Al?
There's a lot of talk about foreign investment in Turkey, and I can testify that I have made the largest foreign investment in Turkey because I've got married there after being 10 years and have a son. I would like all of you to imagine a trade territory that is 2 times the size of Brazil. That would be 2 times the GDP, twice the size of its population, and twice its growth rate. Such a trade territory would have a population of 500 million people. It would have a collective GDP of $4.5 trillion US, and it would be growing around 5% a year. This territory would also represent 5% of global world product, and in years to come could represent very much more, possibly even 10% in 2 decades. I don't think there's many corporate interests here today, but if you were, you'd be on the edge of your seat because this would be of utmost interest. The market I'm talking about is not a myth, but it is real. It is a trade region with Turkey at the center. My company calls it Corridor 39 because of its location along the 39th latitude that passes right through Turkey. Some of you may refer to this as the MENA plus Central Asia and Caucasus region. Some of the oil belt because 60% of the world's oil reserves come from here. Having natural resources and under-leveraged banking systems, many of these countries have the means to build their public infrastructures and to feed consumption of their burgeoning young middle classes. And they have a lot of headroom for growth, something mature countries like most of the BRICS and even Brazil have less of. Before I jump into these slides, I wanted to give you the context of Turkey. It's not just when we're talking about Turkey and economic impacts, we're talking about a larger region. And Turkey has become the great enabler for the progress of the MENA region and beyond. If you go and you want to do a construction project, more and more as an American company, you go and you get a Turkish contractor. If you want to build a sales force in North Africa or even Central Asia, people like Coca-Cola, General Electric, they're setting up their headquarters in Turkey, and they're using Turks to do that. So, just to break, Middle East is a very complicated place, as we know, and for purpose of simplicity and Turkey's relations, let's talk about Turkey's relation with MENA, Turkey's relationship with the West, and with Turkey. This is the story of Turkey's trade. A lot of people are concerned, particularly here in the West, that Turkey has changed its orientation towards the East. Foreign Minister Davutoglu had a policy called zero problems with neighbors. And everyone laughs about that now because Turkey has better relations with practically everybody right now around it. However, this was actually a really good policy in the sense that it was really led by trade. And a pillar of that foreign policy was building trade integration with the region. And His Excellency, Ambassador Salaheldin, talked about the trade relationships that have grown over recent years. And that's true for Syria and everywhere else. And that still continues today. And back to that trade story, you look at 2003, and you look at exports of 31 billion that in less than 10 years went to 69 billion. At the same time, trade with North America and Europe increased, but not near the rate that it did, with MENA. I think I sort of said that backwards, but you get the idea. You see the growth there: 31 to 69 for Europe and North America, and for MENA 7 to 33 billion. Over time, there's a strong likelihood that I don't know how long. Maybe my gentleman over here from the banking sector probably know better, but probably maybe within a decade that MENA could outperform MENA and EU. Some of these slides are a little bit controversial, but this one isn't too bad. But I want to show this possibly the greatest existential threat to Turkey could be its current account deficit. And the biggest, perhaps about half of the current account deficit comes from energy imports. And you can look at the correlation here, and the white line represents Brent crude oil. And the yellow line is the current account deficit. And as you can sort of see, as one goes up, the other goes down. And Deputy Prime Minister Babacan in his presentation yesterday was talking about incentives that the Turkish government is offering for companies that will invest in harvesting their homegrown resources, such as lignite, and making it a cleaner fuel. He said $5 billion of homegrown energy resources means shaving off $5 billion off off of the current account deficit. So the reason I'm sort of putting this here, this panel is about economic impacts, and this slide shows how vulnerable Turkey is to the price of global energy resources and prices and geopolitical trends, war. This really makes energy prices spike, and I'm going to show you this on subsequent slides. And again, I just wanted to underscore Turkey's dependency on its neighbors. This is another reason why Turkey has to have good relations with everybody. It's getting 60% from Russia, but like 20% from Iran. Could you imagine if Iran just turned the taps off and didn't allow Turkey to have 20% of its gas? Or if Iran, well, let's say that there was a force majeure for whatever reasons, maybe there's an airstrike and cancels its gas contracts and doubles them, Turkey is in serious trouble. And there's an example just to show you how the impact that military conflict in the region has on Turkey. This doesn't make much sense. You just probably see a lot of lines go up and down. But if you were able to look at the computer screen like I can, you would see basically you have dollar, you have the stock market falling, you have dollar bonds, credit default swaps, and the lira going up. So basically everything's going the wrong direction, starting with the buildup on March 3rd, 2003, when the U.S. invaded Iraq. The invasion on 19th, it really spiked. And then, once everybody began to see that things were settled down, everything normalized. And then you see down there at the far end, on May 1st, President Bush made his declaration that everything was fine. But still, if you look at the trend, everything settled down. CDS is called a credit default swap, and it's a main barometer that shows the investors' perceptions of political risk. It's basically the insurance that a bond is going to, the Treasury bill is going to be paid for. This is all my Turkish friends just hate this slide, this is a distribution of Kurdish people map. This is not a Kurdish state map, but as you can sort of see, the density of Kurds that sort of cross Turkey, Iran, and Iraq. This is a risk factor to Turkey that I also wanted to underline, and mainly of the risk that a divided Iraq could pose to Turkey. I also would like to present the possibility that a divided Iraq could also be good for Turkey, and this is something no one would have said a year ago, but I think a lot of my Turkish colleagues might agree to me, just because the north of Iraq has been so economically integrated into Turkey. In fact, Iraqi Kurdistan is the only neighbor that Turkey gets along with now. But there is a risk that if it divided Iraq, that what would the Shia, possibly the Sunnis, but maybe what would the Shias and the Maliki-led government, what would they do in northern Iraq? Would they make an invasion, and would Turkey respond and defend northern Iraq, and what would they get pulled into? And in fact, the Turkish government has made some subtle indications they would step in and do something. And one of the trigger point for a conflict might be the creation of this pipeline that you see here. There's already a pipeline. That pipeline you see right now already exists. There's two pipelines that go side by side. It's called the Yumurtalik pipeline. Only one is working because the other one, the pump station's closed, and they're not firing up again. And it's possible that the Kurds in northern Iraq are going to commandeer that pipeline. And they're building a connecting line that's only about 1 kilometer away from being finished. They're going to hook it in and start exporting oil to Turkey. And this could be a trigger point for a major conflict. I mean, we'll see what happens. And this is what in the National Security Advisor and the National Security Council, these are the issues that the U.S. government is talking about, and how the U.S. as a policy, if they should go away from the one Iraq policy. How am I doing on time? Okay, if I have 2-3 minutes, I really need a full eye because I just got started. Anyway, so just to breeze through here, these are the other issues. The Sunni-Shia face off. there are others who can speak with more authority here, but Turkey's alignments with Syria has also put it at odds with Iran, and I'll take this. Okay, this is the biggest beneficiary of a possible lifting of sanctions with Iran would be Turkey, who already, I guess, $3 billion in trade a year. Although it was double that a few years back, they've reduced their trade. But like what you've seen in northern Iraq, I mean, Iran could go up to 20 billion in possibly 10 years. So this is another a very positive geopolitical impact that Turkey could have. And Egypt, I think we've covered that fully. But I would like to underscore that even though political relations are not good with Egypt, the economic relationship continues to be very good. In fact, I was Baltaja, who's the vice president of the stock exchange, was meeting with the head of the stock exchange of Egypt just 3 days ago. I saw him at the hotel. But that same kind of business relationship is still as strong as it was ever. Now, Turkey and the EU, going to West, we've covered the East. Turkey's relationship with the West is another very important. I think it's important for Turkey, but in a different way. For the EU, yes, the trade bloc is big and everything, but what I see is that the EU standards, the EU norms, its economic practices, all the 35 chapters of the acquis is, in my opinion, what has brought the foreign direct investment in 2005. Is because the investment community needs to feel comfortable with Turkey's legal system. But unfortunately, things have been derailed, and for a time it was fine. I don't think Turkey's going to get in the EU, and I don't think Turkey believes it's going to get in the EU, and I don't think the EU believes that they're going to accept Turkey. But this is kind of a lie that both sides were playing along with, and Turkey was continuing to make its reforms. But because of the political rhetoric on all sides, there's no political impetus for Turkey to continue with that. Hopefully this will get back on track. I would say this free trade agreement between Turkey and EU and the United States is a very big threat to Turkey, mainly because Turkey has a customs union agreement with Europe. And if this free trade agreement comes into force, which could take a few years, but if it does, Turkey's going to be left out of this. So for this reason, Turkey is working a bilateral trade agreement with the United States. Security is always a precondition for economic development, and Turkey has and its allies have benefited from this relationship for decades. But this relationship has very much been called into question after the end of the Cold War, and very recently when Turkey looked towards the United States leadership in helping them to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. It's questionable whether or not U.S., you can debate whether or not the United States made the right decision or not. But the fact of the matter is that Turkey now looks towards NATO and wonders, are they a reliable partner in the future? And that was the reason why Turkey now, just almost days after, signed a $4.3 billion business agreement with China. The economic impacts of this NATO agreement really is in question. There is, as hedge fund, my organization advises a number of hedge funds, and we try to segregate between what is media hype and what really affects the economy. And the relationship with Israel is something that has a lot of media hype that really does not impact the economy. And I would like to show this, and again, this is the credit default swap slide. As you can see, this when the flotilla incident on May 31st, 2010, As you can see, the credit default swap index spiked. But soon after, again, it just leveled out, and it leveled out afterwards. And again, this is an idea. This is an example, and I have other examples onwards. The EQ and all these big flashpoints that the media perceives as being having a negligible effect on the economy. Long term, it does not. Now, I'd like to turn to Turkey's internal relations. This, obviously, Gezi Park is something that we all talk about. This is the big white rhinoceros in the corner of the room. You're going to probably see more protests coming up in coming weeks leading up to the election. But I think one thing you need to step back and not look at these protests as really where Turkey is. If you look at the long-term trajectory of the country, in terms of where it's gone and with its human rights, yes, this is a blip along the way. The long-term trends of Turkey is something that's very positive. This government has gone further than anybody in democratizing the country. And Ali's talked about the democratization package with the Kurds. Could it have done more? Absolutely could have. But there is a strong nationalist component of Turkey, not just the Nationalist Party, but all parties who are very afraid of doing too much too fast. And it's a very delicate balancing act. And Gezi has a lot of that is, there's a Kurdish contingent in there. It's also a power struggle of those who don't like the direction that the government is taking the country. But elections are only a year and a half away, and at that time they will have an opportunity to change the direction of the country. And hopefully that is the direction that the change will come to the ballot box and not through the streets. Again, investors get nervous when there are people in the streets. And look at this. These are bond yields starting in 2008, and look how they've fallen. And the blip that related to the Gezi Park protests are just at the end there. This also shows that what has caused the Turkish stock index to fall was not Gezi protest. What caused the bond yields to spike was not Gezi protest, but it's actually the quantitative easing of the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. And that's the CDS that follows a similar trend. And this outlines it again. Again, the point I want to make is Turkey has become immune to the exogenous geopolitical shocks internationally, as well as the local political shocks. This is Bernac raising the possibility of reducing the monetary stimulus in May, and on May 22nd, on May 31st, this is when the Gezi Park really hit the international media. It had already started increasing. But it really spiked up again when Bernac gave a harder line that showed that bond purchases were going to be reduced in mid-2014. Now, this would be on the Kurdish rights. This would have been the slide just a year ago. But I think the Kurdish, and I think I've covered this already, but this is the picture of it now. Kurds do feel themselves more part of Turkey because they feel that they're stakeholders in this country. They don't feel that they're not looking for being part of Iraq or being part of Syria. They feel themselves Turks. They just would like to be able to practice, and they'd like to be able to be educated in their own languages. That they would like to be able to be elected into the government as a party. Again, that 5% threshold, that is actually a very bad thing, and they should hopefully, in Turkey's democratization, they will be able to lower that threshold. The Kurds cannot get 10%. They're not enough of them as a political bloc, so they will always be out of the government as a political group. And that's the EQ. I think elections are coming up in the spring. There are going to be 3 elections: the prime minister, the municipal elections, and followed by the presidential elections and the prime minister elections. current government. CHP is the main opposition party. MHP is the Nationalist Party, and then BDP is the Kurdish Party. So I think I've gone over. So I'm just we can open to questions now.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Al. Thank you both for those very stimulating talks. Let's open it up. Please.
Thank you very much for that talk. I really enjoyed the slides. One of my questions is, so part of the point of the slide was basically saying that Turkey's economy has matured to a point where what happens geopolitically has less of an impact on the economic side. That's fair to say. That even from times like when Gaza happened, you see a spike, but it comes back down after the hype wears off. So given that, most people would classify the Turkish government's foreign policy as pretty activist the past several years. Do you think that's not as big of a risk for the market? Like our investors maybe don't care as much, or if you were advising Turkish government, would you say hey guys, it's a lot safer for you to sort of tone it down and not be as activist?
I think some of those. Let me answer in two sort of stages. First of all, I think that these big projects, the big human rights issues, the EU accession, and these types of issues are important for sticky investment in long term. Whereas the hedge funds and the institutional investors, their headlights only go out, max 6 months, sometimes just a week. Advising the Turkish government, they've done a good job of really focusing on the economy. That's really their biggest success story, is their management of the economy. And the economy is not just so much one of growth, it's really about controlled growth. I would advise the government, continue on that. You can't always punch the gas pedal down. You have to have controlled growth. As far as the volatility that's related to the geopolitical events, I think Turkey is they've proven that they can manage it. And even you look at the U.S. stock market, when there was the build up to the Syria invasion, the U.S. market was also very volatile. Energy spiked and the stock market went down, and everything went the other direction after it became clear that nothing was going to happen.
Comments, questions, please.
The U.S.-Iran bilateral relationship? Are you talking about Iran? About Europe? They're not getting along very well at all right now. Mainly over what's happening in Syria. Although before the Syria issue flared up, Turkey and Iran got along very well. There's a lot of very high-level diplomatic exchanges. Turkey, again, they're very pragmatic people. They focus so much. They need growth. That's the most important thing. They've got a young demographic, and the lady earlier, touched on that. It's under 14 years of age, 25% under the age of 14 years of age. There's so many people entering the workforce. They have to have growth. That's much more important than anything. So that trade, getting the trade sanctions lifted would be something Turkey is lobbying very hard for with the U.S. and others.
You mentioned that you don't think that Turkey is going to be in the EU in the future, and whether that's a result of their own aspirations or whether it's the EU states that want to block them. Do you think that will cause any roadblocks in their progress in the human rights front?
Possibly.
I think that the EU standard is a very good standard, and it's a nice carrot. It's something that the Turkish government, before, when it was popular to have the EU aspiration, they could say to their constituency, hey, we decided we were going to embark on this path, and this is the changes that the EU requires. It's going to be painful, and goes against really what we want to do, but this is where we decided to go. So this is where we're going. We voted on this 10 years ago. But now that carrot is gone, and just the whole rhetoric from a number of countries in Europe really makes that path unpopular. I mean, a politician could never say that line that I just said. But again, if this bilateral trade relation with the United States, the free trade agreement, if that happens, I mean, that also involves some human rights standards. But even still, I mean, I think Turkey, they know they have to do these things on their own terms ultimately, and even without that EU carrot, with this democratization package, is on the right course. So to answer your question, it would be great if the EU standard was still there, but it's still moving forward.
Yes, please.
I think the main driver behind the recent incentive package is reduction of the current account deficit. Again, it got up to 10% of domestic GDP in 2011, and now it's down to 2006, just in a couple of years. So Turkey obviously has the tools at hand in order to lower it, and they're targeting to bring it down to, I believe, 5% within a year and a quarter. And it involves not just oil and gas and incentivizing Turkeys to invest in renewable energy and homegrown resources. It also has to do with discouraging Turkey from importing expensive cars and also trying to get more U.S. companies and European, more international companies into invest in those sectors where Turkey is importing a lot, and that includes machine tools. It includes spare automobile parts, even some agricultural incentives as well.
Great. Another comment or question? I wanted to ask a question, if I may. As someone who studies democracy and democratization in developing countries, I'm always amazed at the success of the Turkish story in many ways, going back over the last decade or so. And of course, the fact that a government that has ties with a history of Islamism, or that has a history that's rooted in Islamism, has actually been the entity that was able to, if not bring these changes about, then at least preside over them. This, of course, is a theme with which everybody here is well acquainted. But in the West, and among students of democratization, Turkey oftentimes is kind of a quiet case. for some reason really not hyped like a lot of other cases are, even like Tunisia is right now. And I wonder if you guys think, and this is addressed to both of you, if the reason for that is that the Turkish government has been intentionally quiet about its own success in this regard, and has not really trumpeted its democratic credentials as much as it might have, or if there might be a hesitance on the part of many scholars or other observers in the West to attribute any sort of really rousing success with democratization to a government that has its roots in Islamist politics, or if in fact it's just the limitations on democracy, the fact that Turkey still has a problem with its treatment of journalists and their coverage of Kurdish problems or other things. In other words, it's just the fact that democratization hasn't really proceeded as far as one might think. And many Europeans, of course, make this argument in arguing against inclusion of Turkey in the EU. So I'd like just maybe a brief set of thoughts or a thought from each one of you on that, if I may.
I heard at least 4 or 5 questions to answer to in that, Steve. So I'm just going to pick sort of just like a general kind of approach to answering it. I think as far as focusing on, Islamism in Turkey, I think it's probably incorrect to say that people don't focus on Islamism in Turkey as much as other places. It's true that, the successor to the Ottoman Empire, it's a country that's rooted and it has an Islamic history. But, as soon as AKP was elected, even prior to that, people were calling it a revolution in Turkey. And it was simply because of the, Islamist leaning of some of the leaders, well before anyone had any clue of what they were really about, that this was really a technocratic government. And so I think that level, that hype, the paranoia was there, both internationally and also domestically. I think it's very easy with the recent Gezi Park protests for people to say, well, this is an increasingly authoritarian government. I mean, look, they're Islamists, right? They must be. That's just how it is. But if you look at what AKP has done, they've reformed a government into a much more democratic sort of system. And in the view of anyone neutral observer, what's happening in Turkey now is, whether you agree with it or not, these are steps that this Islamist-leaning party has taken that has made Turkey much more open in the long run, right? So I think people don't really point to Turkey historically as, oh, well, this is one Muslim country that's been successful because it's a country that has basically choked off its Islamist nature politically for so long. And so now that you do have, that tendency, even given that this is the most successful country in history, you still see a lot of that sort of hype. So it's really more of a question of how much that hype has been dampened by the fact that AKP has been so successful than the fact that it doesn't really exist, in my view.
Just to add to that, Turkey was really at a horrible point in 2000. It had a lot of room to grow. I don't think that Turkey's growth story has anything to do with religion or Sharia law or anything like that. It is true that the AK Party does have a conservative constituency, and sometimes in its social policy, and sometimes in its political language, in order to win votes, it says some things about adultery and abortion and such, which more or less are agenda-changing items for domestic politics, but don't really reflect anything in the economy. I would say one criticism or one concern that I have about, and this has nothing to do with Islam either, but a concern about Turkey is the issue of journalism and the right to free speech. And during the protest, there was television stations where it felt it wasn't in their interest to report on it. And the reason for that is, the reason that you went to CNN Turkey, you went to NTV, you went to all these Turkish stations, and nobody, they're showing penguins, for God's sake. National Geographic penguin episode when they were protesting in Taksim Square. The reason is, who owns the television stations and the newspapers? These are holding companies. These are guys who went into media only so that they could leverage that, so they could get building permissions, high government procurement contracts. And those are the guys who are the media bosses, most of them, not all of them, but generally those are the ones. And that's why the media doesn't really cover this. Now, there are journalists being locked up and so forth, and that's bad as well. But it makes you wonder as an investor if they're not showing what's really going on here. What's the real picture? I think it's important that Turkey opens up the media a little bit more. I think that's important for investor confidence.
Ali, Alan, thank you very much, and thank everyone for attending this terrific panel.